Welcome everybody to the 21st weekly CACOR Zoom conference. That's right, 21 weeks. I apologize, you were interrupted last week because CACOR chose to have its AGM last Wednesday, and we couldn't cope with 2 Zoom talks, some of us. So look, Jeff Passmore. I've known Jeff Passmore for quite a long time. I don't think we'll say how long. He's a visionary, like most of the people at CACOR and US Club of Rome, but he's also an entrepreneur who gets things done. I first met Jeff when Wayne Richardson, who's also on this call, and I were involved with getting money out of the Federal Panel on Energy R&D for environmental projects. We did pretty well. And Wayne told me just now that Jeff was the champion of the Environment Canada PERD contracts. He was able to secure something like $12 million to support the work on the production of ethanol from cellulose rather than from plants like sugar beet. So Jeff is also one of the 2 new directors of CACOR, elected last Wednesday, along with Chloe McClellan, who's also on this call. So Jeff, over to, I should of course say, Jeff is currently running a series of conferences on bioeconomy, but he's here for us today with a talk tailored for our purposes. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. And as the saying goes, an introduction that only my mother would believe. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be here with all of you. And John, you're absolutely right. We've known each other for many, many years, even decades. But I'm really pleased to be a new member of the board of the Club of Rome, and pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words about the industrial bioeconomy, which is a space that I've been working in for the last 20 years. And before that, I was working in renewable energy so I've been kind of in the clean tech and bioeconomy space for something like 42 years. I'm hoping that the outcome of this presentation will leave all of us thinking that maybe we could do a little bit more to advance the industrial bioeconomy in Canada. And as the title of the presentation suggests, will Canada transform or stand on the sidelines? That's a little bit of a spoiler alert, I guess, as to what I think we'll actually do. But let's go ahead, and we'll see what everybody thinks as we go. I'm looking forward to the end of your questions and discussion. So what is the industrial bioeconomy? Well, now I could advance the slide before, Art, and now it doesn't want to let me. So let's just see here. Why would that be? Oh, here we go. Okay. The industrial bioeconomy, well, it's producing a wide variety of products and materials from carbohydrates. So biomass, basically, replacing the hydrocarbon economy with the carbohydrate economy. And we all know about renewable fuels like ethanol. Biojet is becoming quite the trendy fuel these days. Many of the airlines have blended biojet into their airline fuel. Of course, heat and electricity, and what I also find exciting is bio-based chemicals, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Actually, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a catalog of over 3,000 items that they have certified. You can go to the website and just Google U.S. Department of Agriculture Bio-Preferred Program, and the USDA certifies a minimum 30% biomass based, and by that they mean it's derived from plants and agricultural materials, forestry, and I mean, there's some obvious examples I've listed there, like, you know, paper and packaging and engineered woods, insulation, paint, solvents, lubricants, exciting stuff like cosmetics. Textiles is a terrible industry in terms of its environmental footprint. So obviously, if textiles can be made with carbohydrates, all the better. Essentially, about, I would say, at least 90% of what we currently get from a barrel of oil, we could instead be getting from biomass. Now, what's the size of this prize? Well, back in May, McKinsey, a global consulting firm that many of you probably are familiar with, McKinsey and Company, came out with a report called The Biorevolution: Innovations Transforming Economies, Societies, and Our Lives. And they, when I first read this, I actually stumbled over it because I thought I read that the direct economic impact of the biorevolution would be up to $4 trillion. And then I realized they were saying a year. And that's direct impact, not including the indirect impacts, $4 trillion a year in the next 10 to 20 years. And that includes biopharmaceuticals. But as it says in the study, more than half of the direct impact would be outside human health in domains such as agriculture and food, consumer products and services, materials and energy production. So that's essentially the industrial bioeconomy. So you're looking at a $2 trillion a year business. To put that in context, is $2 trillion a big number? Well, $2 trillion is the size of Canada's annual GDP. So it's a huge amount of economic activity. How is it happening? What's going on here? Well, McKinsey says that it's because of innovations in biology. And it's been propelled by a confluence of breakthroughs in the science of itself, biology itself, but also combining that with computing, data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, biological engineering. I mean, essentially all these things combined are increasingly being used to create novel materials. And these can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a wonderful opportunity here. And Canada could be part of that opportunity, which we'll see as we go a little bit further along. So many of you may remember this film back in 1967-68, The Graduate. And at that point, Benjamin, played by Dustin Hoffman here, was being told by the friend of his father, his neighbor, that the future is plastics. Well, I think now what the message to Benjamin would be is that the future is biology. So here's a comment that was made in The Economist back in July of this year. I don't know how many of you saw the article, Twilight of the Petrostates. The quote was, "Don't be fooled. The world's economies are moving away from fossil fuels. The recent turmoil in oil markets is not an aberration, it's a glimpse of the future." And I'm going to put up a few slides in a minute or two here that will demonstrate what the Economist was talking about when they mentioned that economies are moving away from fossil fuels. Another quote was from Mark Carney. Of course, we all know, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, and now a United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action. And he's also working for one of the big finance firms, BlackRock, I think it is. And his quote was back to the UN. I think these are all pieces of information I've gathered up over the last 10 months. So firms that align their business models to the transition to a net zero carbon world will be rewarded handsomely. Those that fail to adapt will cease to exist. That's quite an incredible comment. Those that fail to adapt will cease to exist. And I think we're seeing a growing recognition by a number of big companies for a need for that adaptation. So here's just two small examples of where some of the repositioned investment capital could go. Shell plans to invest $2 to $3 billion a year on its power and low carbon business. Now that's compared to an overall spending budget of $30 billion a year between 21 and 25. So obviously $3 billion is only 10% of their total $30 billion in expenditures. But that could easily increase as the time passes and the sense of urgency passes. And they're doing this because they hope to be able to fight their competitors like BP and Total for market share, quote, as economies around the world go green. And then the one that struck me as even more incredible was Phillips 66, a big refiner on the West Coast in the US, is going to invest US $700 million to convert one of its oil refineries to biofuels and renewable diesel production. And they're doing that, it's driven entirely by government policy and the certainty that that government policy is going to stay in place. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through and the need for that level of certainty. So as I mentioned, the 2020 message to the graduate is biology. And if I was a parent living in Alberta, for example, or Saskatchewan, and I've got kids who are currently 8 to 14 years old, I wouldn't expect them 10 years from now to be working in the oil and gas sector. So I need to get my children educated with degrees in chemistry and biological science and chemical engineering, and you can see the various lists there: biological and electrical engineering, data analytics, computer sciences, and actually a very important one, marketing and communications. But the interesting thing is that many of these skills already exist in the oil and gas sector, and such skilled individuals could readily find employment and add value to emerging industrial bioeconomy companies. So, you know, you'll often hear people like Elizabeth May of the Green Party saying, we want the government to stop supporting and subsidizing oil and gas companies, but we want them to support the employees. And this is an opportunity for those employees to find new, exciting work in an area that their children will be proud of. Now, how tenable is fossil fuels' future? So this is what I was talking about, and this is sort of what the reference was in the Economist quote. And I've come up here with about 12 or so examples of where we need to be aware of what's going on out there in the market. So Deutsche Bank is cutting off financing for new tar sands and oil sands and Arctic oil and gas projects, and it's going to end its involvement with coal mining by 2025. Might not be soon enough. They might decide to advance that. The European Investment Bank, which is the world's biggest multilateral lender, is going to cease financing fossil energy projects by the end of next year. A move, it says, is going to unlock €1 trillion of sustainable climate investments between now and 2030. The United Kingdom's biggest pension fund is banning investments in tar sands and oil sands, Arctic drilling and coal projects. And it's that fund, which is called the National Employment Savings Trust, will shift £5.5 billion into climate-aware investments as it anticipates a green economic recovery from coronavirus. There's 3 examples. Let's look at some more. Moody's downgraded Alberta's credit rating about 6 or 8 months ago, citing continued dependence on oil. Moody's, quote, opinion of a structural weakness in the provincial economy that remains concentrated and dependent on non-renewable sources and remains pressured by a lack of sufficient pipeline capacity to transport oil efficiently, with no near-term expectation of a significant rebound in oil-related investments. And of course, what did the Alberta finance minister do? He blamed all of their dependence on fossil fuels on the previous NDP government, which of course is completely irrelevant. Even the Queen, her private banker and wealth manager, Coutts, has announced that it plans to cut carbon emissions in its funds and portfolios by 25% before the end of 2021. And it's introduced climate-linked exclusions that will exclude all companies that get more than 5% of their revenues from thermal coal, oil sands, or Arctic oil and gas exploration. This is just an example from the Dutch Supreme Court back in December, so 10 months ago, that upheld its government's human rights duty to protect citizens from climate change and ordered the Netherlands to cut greenhouse gas emissions 25% below 1990 levels by 2020, the end of this year. I don't think they're on track, but it's an admirable effort. Now, some more follow the money. We all know that the immediate past governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, warned of stranded oil and gas assets from the shift to the clean economy. And stranded assets are one of the biggest fears. Fear of stranded assets is a huge fear when it comes to investing, and it's one of the concerns that some investors have had when it comes to investing in the industrial bioeconomy and why we need policy certainty. Total from France wrote off 9.3 billion Canadian dollars in assets in Alberta, including 7.3 billion in the Foothills mine, which opened only 2.5 years ago. So that's another remarkable decision. And ESG, which stands for Environment Social Governance, which was not anything I had even heard of until 2 years ago, Environment Social Governance investing, those assets have passed $1 trillion milestone now, and this is assets in sustainable funds. They expect it to hit a record high of 1.06 trillion at the end of June. Well, that's already happened. Royal Bank of Canada, this is a very small example of something that's going on in Canada, but it's the largest chartered bank in this country, and it's dipping its toe in the world of renewable energy finance by buying into 2 new solar farms producing a combined 39 megawatts of electricity in Southeast Alberta. Of course, 39 megawatts is pretty small, but it's as we say, dipping their toe. I think they need to do a lot more than dip their toe. They need to get in up to their waist, and follow what's going on in the rest of the world. And then we've got one last follow the money. Sweden's central bank sold off all of its government of Alberta bonds because they had too large a climate footprint. And here's amazing. The Guardian decided back in about January of this year that it was no longer going to accept advertising from oil and gas companies. I find that remarkable because, you know, the print media, the newspapers are suffering so badly because of the lack of advertising. And yet here's the Guardian saying it's, you know, and it's the first major global news organization to institute an outright ban on taking money from companies that extract fossil fuels. The quote from them: "Our decision is based on the decades-long efforts by many in that industry to prevent meaningful climate action by governments around the world." So quite a statement from the Guardian. And then this one, which I think is going to be a real driver, the world's largest reinsurance company, Munich Re, and it's not just them. I mean, it's Swiss Re and Munich Re and you know, others, but they've started including bioeconomy projects in their portfolio as a hedging strategy to protect the existing assets from climate change. So what they're concerned about is that they've insured or reinsured. If you know how the insurance business works, essentially, you know, if you've got $1 billion project and you need 5 different insurance companies to each put in 200 million, then they go to the reinsurance side of the equation and say, listen, will you reinsure what we've insured just in case there's any claims on this? Well, so Munich Re is now saying, well, you know, we're getting pretty nervous here, and we're going to start investing in projects that reduce the environmental impacts of climate change. They've reinsured about 2 billion in projects in photovoltaics, and they've allocated so far, and it's small compared to what they do in business, but it's a start about 800 million in the bioeconomy. So let's talk more about this insurance business, okay? Because it's the weather events that are making insurers nervous. And commerce is ruled by insurance. Every lender wants their debt. They need some kind of assurance that their debt is going to be repaid. The money they loaned is going to be repaid, and that's the function that insurance performs. But a colleague of mine who works for Munich Re out of their US office told me that climate change is going to either kill the insurance business, or we're going to have to stop providing coverage, and they've already decided they're going to stop providing coverage to coal, or substantially increase the coverage rates, which is going to make the cost of borrowing much higher. So, you know, this is a wake-up call when the insurance companies are basically saying climate change is either going to kill our business, or we're going to have to stop providing coverage and rates are going to go way up. So if we don't have insurance, there's no credit, and can commerce then proceed? Again, this is a message that needs to get across to decision makers in government. How is Canada doing? Well, 50 countries in the world have national bioeconomy strategies. In fact, 50 countries have had national bioeconomy strategies for at least 4 years. Canada isn't one of them. The US, as I mentioned in one of my early slides, has a federal biopreferred procurement program, that one I said where you can get USDA certification that your product is at least 30% biomass based. And what I didn't say, what is the impact of that, is that anything that has a US Department of Agriculture certification sticker on it, then the US government has to show preferential procurement treatment for those products. Well, you can all imagine how much stuff the US government consumes, because that includes the US military. So this has created an enormous market pull for those 3,000 items that are in the USDA biopreferred catalog. Canada, we have asked the Federal Department of Agriculture here in Ottawa for at least 10 years, why can we not have a similar program to the USDA biopreferred program, which has been in place for more than 10 years, and we've never received any kind of traction at all here with the Federal Department of Agriculture. Now, Art, you can't say anything because Art saw my presentation, you know, when I sent it over to him a couple of days ago. But I just want you to, I'm going to read this to you, and you have to figure out which country said this. With the objective of cementing country X as an economy based on knowledge, with sustainable production of high added value in all its regions and the fair and equitable use of its biodiversity, the government announced the National Bioeconomy Strategy. The purpose is to make the bioeconomy one of the pillars for the productive transformation of our country by promoting innovation, value addition, diversification, and sophistication of its economy, applying the principles of the circular bioeconomy and seeking the decarbonization of production and consumption processes. Now, 3, 2, 1, what possible country could have been so forward-looking? Of course, you would expect something like that to come out of Germany, but Germany has had a national bioeconomy strategy for, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. Guess which country? Costa Rica. So in the midst of COVID, August of this year, their president made this announcement that productive systems face a fourfold challenge in the face of the global economic contraction exacerbated by COVID-19 to produce more efficiently or reinvent themselves, maintain value chains that support jobs and livelihoods, while the sustainable use and rehabilitation of nature are ensured in the face of climate change. It's remarkable that Costa Rica can get its act together and make such a declaration and create a national bioeconomy strategy. And yet we here in Canada, well, we don't even have an industrial strategy, let alone an industrial bioeconomy strategy. So how are we doing? Well, we have got massive amounts of biomass. Canada has 9% of the world's forests. Yet our forestry companies continue to struggle and pulp and paper mills are shutting down. 9% of the world's forest, and I'll have a map here to show you in a minute, but that's larger than most countries. I mean, it's almost the size of the European Union. And we have 160 million acres of farmland, 70% of which is in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And we have big city municipal waste. So let me just show you a couple of maps here. What does that map tell you? That map tells you that as far as agriculture is concerned, there's a huge economic opportunity in Saskatchewan and Alberta to diversify their economies, the ones that are so dependent on oil and gas, and the one which Premier Kenny of Alberta continues to think he's going to discover the future by looking in the rearview mirror. And you'll notice Alberta, how much of that is agriculture. Well, the rest of the province is forestry. And so, yeah, and that's what the next map shows. 348 million hectares is all of Canada, of course, but look how much forestry there is in the boreal region of Saskatchewan and Alberta. Now, clearly, of course, when you talk about harvesting biomass for production of goods and services, or products and materials in the industrial bioeconomy, it has to be done sustainably. And that's obviously one of the things that the industry is very aware of. But I mean, we lose way more trees in Canada to forest fires than we would ever lose from harvesting in the bioeconomy. So now, if you're going to get the government to do something that if you have an ask of government and you need to, you want to ask it to do something like create a national bioeconomy strategy or include, synthetic biology in the tax code, you need to be able to fit within the federal government's stated policy objective. There's no use having an ask of the government that doesn't meet their policy goals. But I believe that the industrial bioeconomy fits a job creation for the middle class, industrial development and infrastructure, meeting climate goals, made in Canada goal, improved health and security, new economic opportunities for rural Canada, and such as farmers and foresters. And I really want to focus on this last one, decoupling economic growth and environmental protection. John Hollins, who introduced me, probably remembers, and it's just incredible that in many people's minds, this has never gone away. People still try to argue, some people still try to argue, especially in the oil and gas sector, that if we have environmental protection, it'll stagnate economic growth. Nothing could be more ridiculous and further from the truth, and I'm going to show this slide from California to demonstrate that. So this is California's GDP started to decouple from their greenhouse gas emissions back in 2002, 2003. It's a remarkable slide because not only does it demonstrate the decoupling, it shows that with GDP growth and population growth, not only have GHG emissions gone down, but GHG emissions per capita and GHG emissions per GDP have gone down. So this is a wonderful success story, and it's driven in part by California's low carbon fuel standard, and of course that combined with the federal government's renewable fuel standard. But the next, so are Canada's targets helpful in driving down emissions? Well, in my judgment, setting long-term targets such as we will achieve X carbon emissions reduction by the year 2030 are virtually useless unless they have annual milestones. And so I'll show you this next two slides. This is again the Canadian result. You see, we missed the Rio target, we missed the Kyoto target, we missed the Copenhagen target. We're not going to meet the Paris target. And you can see what our historical domestic emissions are, that green line, and then projected domestic emissions, the blue dotted line. The ones that are projected beyond that even still don't come close to meeting Paris because the target is too far off. And as someone in the oil and gas sector described to me, when there aren't annual milestones to a long-term target, the industry associations representing the oil and gas sector spend more money lobbying against those targets and having them changed than they spend trying to meet the targets. However, if you have annual targets, here's again, California's low carbon fuel standard. So they have annual carbon intensity regulations that drive investment decisions. And look how on track they are. Started in 2011, they're gone in 2019. And you can see that every year it ratchets down until it's a 20% reduction by 2030. And of course, if you're above the line, then you generate a deficit. And if you're below the standard, you generate credits, and it does allow for credit trading. Let's look at what technologies are creating this drive down the curve. So California has something they call the carbon intensity function. And you can see that with respect to volumes, ethanol is the largest volume of renewable fuels, but it has a higher carbon intensity than electricity has, or biomethane, or some of the others. And so if you look at the credits that the various fuels gain, then of course electricity, because it has a lower carbon intensity than some of the others, you can see that it gets more credits than ethanol does. But nevertheless, ethanol does get some credits depending on how it's generated, of course. But this is how they're achieving their targets. So getting industrial bioeconomy steel in the ground in Canada, we need certainty. Certainty is the mother of investment, like I mentioned before. The biggest fear that investors have is the fear of stranded assets, and that the government's going to come along after you've built a $100 million, $200 million, $300 million facility, and the government comes along and changes the rules. So getting capital goes where it can generate the highest rate of return at the lowest possible risk. So basically, capital allocates itself. People might not think of that, but in fact it does. It goes where it can make the highest rate of return at the lowest possible risk. So if I'm a major oil company or a major agricultural firm, or any of the big strategics that I'm thinking about, what's my next investment going to be, and I can get an 18% internal rate of return by investing in something that I've done before and done for years, versus a single-digit return that I'm going to get doing something innovative, well, guess where I'm going to put my investment? I'm going to allocate that capital to business as usual. And so there need to be strong and reliable investment incentives in place to drive capital to achieve the government's desired outcome. So if the desired outcome is greenhouse gas emission reduction, then and if the industrial bioeconomy can deliver on that greenhouse gas emission reduction and be one of the players in that space, then we need strong and reliable investment incentives. And I think those are best delivered through the tax system. So this next slide, policy measures or program dollars. Program dollars come and go with changes in government, and they might be put in place for 3 years or 5 years or whatever, but the next, if it's a 5-year program, by year 3.5, you're already spending all your time preparing for the next budget submission and lobbying the government to extend the program. We have wonderful examples of that in the province of Ontario and federally, where a whole lot of program money was spent. In the case of Ontario, creating a small hydro industry, for example, and then after 10 years of the program and the program expired, even though we were asking the Ontario government at the time, you need to embed some kind of certainty into the tax system. And what happened was that 6 small hydro companies that had been created all went out of business, because they didn't put anything that was long-term stability. So tax policy that's embedded for the long term, and I put here think CERC, that is the conservation, Canadian Renewable and Conservation Expenses. And that was something that back when I was chair of the Canadian Wind Energy Association in the mid-90s, it took us 3 budget cycles. Paul Martin was finance minister at the time, and Anne McClellan was Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources. And we asked that wind be treated the same as oil and gas with respect to flow-through shares to passive investors, and what was the difference between prospecting for wind above the ground than drilling for oil below the ground. As I say, it took 3 budget cycles, and it took a huge effort on the part of a caucus of Liberal backbench MPs that we were able to get to put pressure on the finance department. But guess what? It went into the 1996 budget. Well, here we are, 24 years later, it's still there. What program that was created in 1996 is still around today? So now, obviously, if you're talking about a startup that needs, and we do have support for research and development and SR&ED tax credits in Canada and so on. And so if the two can work in combination, then that's great for startups. But as you get further down the commercialization spectrum, handing out cash to companies isn't really the answer. But creating the policy goals that you want to, achieving the policy goals that you want to achieve can best be embedded in the tax system. But it is a heavy lift. Finance doesn't like changing the tax code. So what's my summary? The future is biology, not fossil. Canada has enormous bioresources. As I mentioned, 9% of the world's forests, lots of agricultural land. Commerce is ruled by insurance. Capital allocates itself. The economy will grow while reducing emissions. You saw the California example there. And follow the money, because I think the market is going to move way faster than government. It's certainly the case here in Canada. So my conclusions are that concerning the industrial bioeconomy, Canada is standing on the sidelines. The future cannot be found by looking in the rearview mirror. I'm sorry, Jason Kenney, but you're holding your own province back. Absolutely holding the province of Alberta back, and indeed, in the long run, potentially hurting Canada. And Canadians are going to be forced to consume bio-based products and materials made in other countries. So we're going to have another trade deficit, because instead of making all this stuff ourselves and exporting it to a world that is demanding products and materials that don't have a high carbon footprint, we won't be making those products and exporting them. We'll be importing them from the US and Europe and Southeast Asia. And Canada's GDP will lose, and this is just an estimate, but in fact, if we're talking about a $2 trillion a year business by 2030 to 2040, there's no reason why Canada couldn't capture 10% of that global market, which would be $200 billion a year. So now, John mentioned in his kind introduction that I run an annual conference. It's usually, of course, over 2 days, but this year it is a weekly 1-hour webinar. We've already had 5 of them. There are 3 left every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And so there's three left to come. The one that probably would be of most interest to this group is the last one on October 27th, when we will have speakers from the OECD, Shell, Elizabeth May will be on the panel. There's about 5 or 6 really top-notch speakers on that October 27th webinar. And because of it being the climax, it'll last for 1.5 hours rather than an hour. So I think that's everything I've got to say, and I hope I didn't go beyond my allocated time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've got some questions that are building up for you, but I'm going to ask the first one because of my great interest in fuel and energy. And in fact, you know that I have in some of your presentations in scaling up, I've asked questions along this line and have received quite unsatisfactory responses, if any at all. So I'm going to put it to you directly, and that is the when you look at the energy mix and you look at biofuels. Is there any way that there are people that are looking at integrating the existing alternate energies like geothermal, solar, wind in with bio? I know from my microgrid, I would love to have a bio engine here that I could run for 4 hours a day and charge up my batteries and put it all in a full system context. But I don't know what's happening in the bio industry. Because, you know, I get the feeling listening to your presentation, it's almost competitive where biofuels are competing with other alternate energy forms. Can you comment on that?
Oh, no, that would be really a waste of energy. We don't need to compete here. In fact, as you know, wind and solar, you know, they generate electricity. Biomass, for the most part, is, you know, can be used to generate transportation fuel and a whole bunch of renewable chemicals. So everything that we currently get from a barrel of oil, all the specialty chemicals, like I mentioned before, paints and plastics and personal care products. Of course, wood can be burned in a boiler to generate heat and electricity, but it's probably not the best use of wood, except in remote communities which are currently flying in diesel fuel while simultaneously being surrounded by trees. So, you know, there's a lot of First Nations that are either have or are contemplating doing putting in a biomass boiler to replace their diesel generation. But that's not really much in the way of competition to wind and solar, which are going to generate electricity, you know, for the grid. So I think really what we're talking about here is transportation fuels. There might be some competition with electric vehicles, but there was a speaker on Scaling Up yesterday, and I think, Art, you were on it, and the young man from Massachusetts, and he made the point that many people cannot afford an electric vehicle. They simply haven't got the money to pay for a new car, whereas they can, but they would like to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint, and they can do so by blending gasoline, by burning gasoline that's blended with ethanol. And you can go up to 15% blends in the US, or of course you can get a flex fuel vehicle that'll go up to 85%. I don't know whether there's anything happening though that can help you at your residence. I mean, if you're thinking about, you know, can I get some kind of a small gasifier or something like that, you know, that would complement your, I mean, you can always, don't you have a wood stove? You can always do that when you don't have enough sunlight for, you know, to run your solar and your solar system.
Okay, their next question, John Meyer. John?
Yeah, hi. Enjoyed this a lot. My presentation on Canada's energy future, Charlie Hall sat in on that, and he's the originator of the EROI, energy returned on energy invested, and he set up this Biophysical Economics Institute. Now, I've thought of that as a policy development for national governments, regional governments, who have to understand what the real biophysical reality is and what your limits are going to be and what you have to pay attention to, what threats are coming that won't be represented in the money economy. But what you've presented is the bioeconomics basically at the corporate level, how to get corporations doing things, how to get direct investment from corporations. And I'm just wondering if you've thought at the biophysical economics level, where we measure in real physical units as opposed to dollars, that government should be looking at. And then we've got this whole other medium of the money economy, the commercial economy, but they're starting to pay a lot of attention to biophysical issues. So have you thought of how they might develop some synergy there? Anyway, that's the question.
Sure. I understand the question, and thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. We need to be looking at both and the synergies. I'm aware of it. I haven't spent a lot of time, delving into that because, you can see what I've spent a lot of my time delving into, which is where's the investment dollars, where are the investment dollars going? But as I mentioned, if we're not, we want to be net energy positive and we need to be sustainable in order for this to be successful. And yesterday's panel on at Scaling Up was about environmental and social justice, and the speakers were making the point that in the absence of including environmental and social justice and sustainability, the industrial bioeconomy will fail. It will be held to a higher standard. I mean, your question demonstrates that, actually. I think the industrial bioeconomy is going to be held to a higher standard than the hydrocarbon economy that it would like to replace. That may not be fair, but it's fact. And unless we have the environmental groups on board and civil society on board, then we're simply not going to be able to have a successful transition to a carbohydrate economy. But I would like to spend more time talking to you about some of the concerns that you've raised and how we do make sure that they're incorporated into these considerations.
Yeah, well, I guess the bottom line is that we have to have the major policy directions and priorities set in the biophysical economics area level, and the investments on the ground have to be made in dollars. So you have to assure that the incentives you create, whether it's tax or direct investment or whatever, subsidies to get things going, they have to end up being energetically, biophysically, economically rational. So you have to match the those two streams of decision making.
Did you say rational?
Rational, has to be energy rational.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, politics isn't rational, but if it was, we wouldn't continue subsidizing the oil and gas industry. But anyway, I take your point, and I think that's something we need to work towards.
Okay.
Okay, our next question is from Dave Pollock. Dave, you're going to have to, there we go.
Yep, thanks. Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
I'm curious about the company. I'm wondering if you're familiar with Agrisoma over in the Gatineau and their jet fuel work. And I know that Qantas has experimented by using their fuel. It's kind of a mustard-like oil seed. First flight's already been done with 100% of that jet fuel. So there's two questions I had in my mind. One is the issue of needing to scale that kind of thing up so the supply chains are available for aircraft all over the world. I think it's a considerable landmass that would be required to do that kind of fueling. But I'm also wondering why a company like Air Canada would not be persuaded to experiment with a Canadian-based company rather than an Australian-based company. And I just thought you might have some greater focus on that company than I do.
Well, I do know Agrisoma. They spoke at Scaling Up, I think it was in 2017, perhaps, maybe 2018. The conference has been going since 2016, so it's quite new and young. But and I'm aware that their fuel, as well as many other biojet companies, have. Let me back up and put it this way. There's not enough fuel being made to satisfy the demand from the airlines. The airlines are trying to figure out how to reduce their emissions. And there's a group out of Amsterdam called Sky, S-K-Y, and then the letters capital N, capital R, capital G, Sky NRG, and they're begging for fuel to provide some of the airlines. And the European airlines, to your point about Air Canada, the European airlines have been just the way I think Canadians are. I mean, Canadians are far too complacent about this whole question. Europeans are not. And so European airlines are trying to figure out how can we reduce our environmental footprint. Why Air Canada is not involved? I think they've been involved to some extent because through their connections with United Airlines as part of whatever they call that group of airlines that collaborate for points.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think Air Canada has been involved.
Star
to some
Alliance.
extent.
Yeah.
Star Alliance. I think they've been involved a little bit through Star Alliance, but so I'm not. But I am not sure how successful Agrosoma has been in terms of raising capital and getting that first project built. That's part of the reason, of course, for the Scaling Up Conference is because that's the challenge we do face in Canada is we're really good at research, piloting, demonstration, but then when it comes to actually commercializing, often the capital is found offshore and not commercialized here in Canada. And I would love to see that change. But we just need to keep the foot on the gas with respect to persuading airlines like Air Canada, although right now I don't think they're going to be doing anything innovative until people start flying again.
Okay, our next question, Bill Tyson, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I just wondered, I understand that sugar beets and canes can be used to convert to alcohol that's useful for transportation, but I don't know how energy efficient that is. And is there any conceivable raw material that we produce in Canada that could be used to make a transportation fuel?
Sure. Well, of course, we are using grain to make ethanol, and some people. I mean, there's been a lot of controversy about the energy balance of that over the years, and the whole food fuel debate, which was a little bit of a it was a little bit misleading in terms of what the American Grocers Association was trying to do in terms of blaming higher food costs. But if you're talking about biomass as opposed to grain-based ethanol, then in Western Canada, any of the wheat that is grown, the straw, of course, becomes a feedstock. Wheat or oats or barley, any of those straws can become a feedstock for second-generation ethanol. And of course, wood can become a feedstock for second-generation ethanol. The chemistry is different if you're using ag biomass versus using wood biomass, and the chemistry is different depending if you're using hardwoods or softwoods. But there's plenty of feedstock available in Canada because, as you say, we don't grow sugarcane and we don't grow much in the way of beets. Although in Atlantic Canada, I think they're growing something called sugar beets, which is grown specifically for energy purposes. In the case of sugarcane, all of you must be familiar with an Ottawa company called Iogen on Hunt Club Road, just opposite the golf club there. And Iogen developed a technology to turn biomass into renewable fuels, ethanol. And they built their first commercial plant in Brazil where they're using the sugarcane bagasse. So when you crush sugarcane and get all the sugar value out of it, what's left over is called bagasse, and all that biomass is what's being used to as a feedstock for the ethanol that they're producing there.
Okay, the next one is John Hollins. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Jeff, I think that you and I will easily agree that Canada's public policy related to global warming is a complete and utter disaster over a period of 3 decades. We've set percentage targets for years long after they were made, when the government has changed color, and we haven't come anywhere close to getting where we wanted to go, where we said we wanted to go. I take your point about reporting frequently. There has been no accountability whatsoever in Canada's management of its greenhouse gas policies. You've made the point, the Minister of Finance has been the most important cabinet minister since 1867, until more recently when the only important minister is the Prime Minister. But CACOR is about to receive a report on a simulation study it did of policy options. And you'll be sitting on the board that decides what to do that. I think the instinct of many of us would be to say, hey, we got to go and talk to the Minister of Environment and the senior brass at Environment Canada. But should we be thinking primarily of going and talking to the Minister of Finance if we can't get in to see the Prime Minister?
Yes. I mean, John, the Environment and Climate Change Canada is a regulatory agency. They're not going to determine policy. Once the policy is determined, they come up with the regs. So, you know, you need to be speaking. I would say, if you want to build a political coalition, sure, get Wilkinson involved because he should know about it. But I would go after, I said, you know, innovation, science, and economic development, and I would go after Energy Mines, Natural Resources Canada, and for sure, finance. I think, as you say, if you can't get into the Prime Minister's office, then the next best thing, especially right now, where it seems clear that Chrystia Freeland, you know, is a Prime Minister in waiting.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next one was Gordon Kubinek, but I seem to have lost him. Ted Manning, can you jump in now?
Yeah, Jeff, you've largely answered my question already on the biomass substitution issue. I know that it has been a rather hot topic in some countries where they contend that they're losing food production capacity due to biomass, or that they're being outbid. But what is the potential? What I've seen talked about a lot for Canada is hybrid poplar, and particularly even where it could be cropped on land of poorer quality that doesn't in fact displace food production or even animal agriculture, and used as a feeder fuel. Has that been looked at all, and is it still considered to be a realistic question?
We seem to have lost your audio, Jeff. No. Maybe we've lost your microphone totally. No.
Actually, Dave and Jean just argued with me on the same thing, so have them talk while Jeff figures out how to look.
Okay, well, my question's actually more of a comment, I suppose, related directly. I didn't realize it as I was writing it to what Ted has. I can't even see why can't I see it? Oh, I got it. Okay, so back in the 1980s, the governments that came after Lougheed decided they did in fact want to try to diversify the economy, and they made ventures into telephones and all kinds of different things. Put dams on every river, and invited the Japanese to come in and essentially do exactly what you just said, Ted. They were going to use enormous areas of the parkland and southern boreal forest of Alberta to produce poplar. And they got a lot of money from the government to do it. They signed all kinds of guarantees, said they were going to operate for a minimum of 20 years. They were going to do it all on a sustainable basis. And after somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 15 years, they simply took the money and ran. Said, bye, you can take care of cleaning it up. We're out of here. So my question was going to be, how do we avoid that happening again? Because it almost certainly will happen again.
Jeff, do you have any audio?
Am I back?
You're very low, but go ahead.
Well, I was starting to say in answer to Ed that, you know, there's lots of marginal land in Canada that is not suitable to agriculture, and you could grow dedicated crops on. Of course, there are always issues associated with monoculture, so you want to be a little bit careful about that. But you know, I think we need to be open-minded about all the possibilities. And this conversation is leading me to think that, and in part, John's question, it's making me think about a chap that we should have as a speaker who could talk to, now mind you, his expertise is on the renewable fuels side exclusively. He doesn't talk about the rest of the bioeconomy, but he would be able to answer some of the questions about food versus fuel, about land displacement, you know, this, what the Europeans introduced called indirect land use change. In fact, he has a model for all this stuff that Natural Resources Canada uses when it's modeling the impacts and market penetration potential of renewable fuels. So anyway, but I don't know, and he can also speak to the question of marginal lands as well. Ed. His name is Don O'Connor. He used to work for a Western Canadian oil company.
You're off again.
Yeah, he's having problems with his microphone.
Jeff, we lost your mic again.
What, this happened once before and
You're
I had
back
to get
now.
out. I'm back?
Yeah.
But low.
Off again.
And off again.
Guess what we're being told is that we're at 2:34 and I have to shut up.
No, well, we can still go till about 3 o'clock. And
Still recording?
yes.
Okay. Anyway, I was trying to say that the gentleman from who used to work for Mohawk might be somebody that we should get as a speaker, because he would have, he's done more economic analysis that would answer perhaps some of John's questions and Edward's questions. And as far as the question that was just asked by, who asked the question about the Japanese in Alberta and how do we prevent them, people coming in and then leaving?
David Doherty.
David. Yeah. I'm not sure how we prevent them, you know, from coming in and then leaving. You know, Canada does have a reputation for, and I, in my consulting business, what I try to do is attract foreign direct investment from the US and Europe, where companies are thinking, where should we build our first commercial plant? And, you know, they think, well, maybe we should be building it in Europe or in Southeast Asia or in Brazil or the US. And I'll say to them, have you ever thought of building in Canada? And the question always comes back, why would we build in Canada? So we're not doing a very good job of letting you know, those companies out there know my answer is A, because Canada has an incredible amount of biomass, and B, we do have some federal and provincial government support programs. You know, again, I talked in my presentation about the weaknesses of programs, but we do have some programs that will reduce the amount of capital that you have to raise if you're trying to build a commercial plant. For example, a facility that is being built right now, or it was being built during, I don't know what happened since COVID, but you know, things have slowed down, but through the Strategic Innovation Fund, I was able to raise 24 million for that company towards, 23 million towards its facility in Sarnia, Ontario for bioplastics. So that is one way we attract these companies. But of course, what do we do when it comes time for them to build their next big plant, or this, you know, a second or third big commercial plant? That's when we often tend to see them say, well, there's better opportunities somewhere else. So we have to have a look at what the economic incentives are.
Okay, thank you. Jean, you have a question.
Yeah, I was intrigued. Jeff, thank you very much for a great presentation, but I was intrigued by your comment about using garbage and municipal waste. I know that many of our municipal waste facilities, there's been some discussion in the last while about the recycling programs and things not going well. Has there been any talk about how municipal waste could actually be used and more effectively used for generating biomass or biofuel?
Go to the website for the city of Edmonton. It has the most progressive landfill policy in possibly in North America. Maybe there's a couple of other ones in California, but the city of Edmonton has recycling, composting, you know, it's regular garbage, but you know what they're doing with anything that has been, so a Montreal-based company called Enerchem has built a facility there in Edmonton to capture all the methane gas that is coming off of the garbage that has been covered. So they've got this methane gas recovery, as well as I say, they're recycling and composting. It's a very, very, as I say, progressive landfill site, and it shows what can be done, because you raised a very, Gene, a very important challenge, which is that increasingly, we don't know what to do with our garbage, and so cities are banning, for example, the landfill of organics. Well, those organics can be a feedstock, frankly, for the bioeconomy. Incredibly, the city of Toronto is trucking garbage to New York and Michigan. So, you know, I mean, those trucks rolling down the 401, it's just ridiculous that we're trucking garbage to those places. So municipal solid waste is a huge potential feedstock for the industrial bioeconomy, and it solves some other problems at the same time. As to recycling, I don't think there's a municipal councillor, certainly not in Ottawa, probably not in the province of Ontario, who would stand up and have the courage to say recycling's not working, but it isn't working. You know, I mean, here in where I live, I have to put my, you know, garbage in inverted commas into 4 different, you know, I do a black box, a blue box, I do composting, and then I have garbage. And, you know, we used to be able to ship a whole lot of that stuff to China. Well, China now has stopped wanting to take it. But the solution really is, I mean, I'm fortunate, I have a big yard, so I do all my own composting, but for all the stuff that I can't put in the compost, the solution is to just go back to the old days when we just put our garbage out at the end of the laneway, and then it goes to a central depot that does all the sorting for us. Because one of the problems with recycling is that everybody puts stuff in the wrong bin.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it just...
Sorry, I was going to ask a question. I don't know, it was within the last decade, the city of Ottawa was doing they'd had this wonderful idea about being able to generate electricity from the feedstocks of the garbage. And there was we spent as a municipality millions of dollars to get this pilot project running that ended up being completely unsuccessul. Do you know anything? Yeah, again, it was another case of somebody running away with the money or taking the money and run. Can you remember that, and do you know what happened with that?
Well, you're talking about Rod Bryden's company that, oh goodness, what was the name of that company? And they were going to take all of the city of Ottawa's garbage and generate electricity with it.
Right.
But I mean, the technology, when they scaled it up, it ran into, it was some kind of a plasma furnace or whatever. I mean, a very, very high temperature. And it basically, it just, as you say, it failed. And unfortunately, it failed. I mean, there's lots of technology that when you get to the stage where you go from demonstration to commercial, and I think that's one of the issues that many cities have, which is once bitten, twice shy. So anybody who comes along now and speaks to city council in Ottawa about some wonderful idea they've got to do, you know, to use our garbage, that people are going to be very nervous about it. Like, will it work? Plasco, that was the name of the company. Plasco. I couldn't think of it for a minute there, but that was so.
And they were using pyrolysis, Dave said, as their technique. Technical.
Oh, I think that, no, you're thinking fast pyrolysis. That's Ensign out in Renfrew. Renfrew does fast pyrolysis. They take wood and turn it into barbecue flavorings and stuff like that. That company has been very successful. They've got Honeywell as an investor and a whole bunch of others. But no, Plasco, Rod Bryden, by the way, he got bought out and got let go. But then when the people who took it over realized the technology wasn't going to work, They sold the company back to Rod, and I think he's, even though he's getting on in years, I think he's still trying to do something, but I don't really know what. But you're right, it made the municipal council in Ottawa very shy.
Okay,
And that's the same
we have a
reason why-
couple of questions here as well. Let's move on. I would like to introduce Cameron to the rest of CACOR. He's a student member, and he has the next question.
Hello, Mr. Passmore. I was just wondering, I'll read my question verbatim. What are some of the problems in the lack of policies related to investment and demand in the biological industrial complex?
What are some of the problems relating to investment?
In terms of policies, yeah.
Okay. Well, where do I start?
Sorry if that was a broad question.
No. It basically, I tried to allude to that in my presentation a little bit. In order to motivate investors to invest, and I don't want to put aside John's question about making sure that this is all makes sense from not just a money point of view, but obviously the broad spectrum, including ecological and sustainability and so on. And I don't think I'm doing John justice, but if you want to motivate investors, and where is the big money? Well, the big money is in large oil and gas companies, large agriculture companies, big pharmaceutical companies. Who's getting into biopharma, for example? Well, it's the pharmaceutical companies. Now, it's small companies typically that get these wonderful ideas. Big companies aren't very innovative. And so, for example, in the case of Ottawa's company iGen, it came up with the technology to convert biomass into second generation ethanol, but the money at the end of the day to build the demo plant was provided by Shell, and in part by Shell and the government of Canada. Those programs to get you past the research and development stage are certainly helpful. As I mentioned, we have good programs for R&D. We have programs that support fundamental research, IRAP, and so on, through the National Research Council. We have scientific research and development tax credits, so that gets you past the fundamental and applied research and piloting. And then once you get into demo, you're starting to talk significant dollars. And those significant dollars typically will come from strategic investors who see some benefit to be had through investing in some new clean technology. And those benefits, so I think the benefits are best delivered through the tax system, as I mentioned earlier. And so it would be wonderful. This, for example, let's take synthetic biology. Why can't we expand the definition of CRC, Canadian Renewable and Conservation Expenses, to include synthetic biology? It didn't include geothermal, Art, to your point from half an hour ago. When CRC first came out in 1996, it didn't include geothermal. Well, now it does. The definition was expanded to add geothermal. So why can't we add, the bioeconomy to that? I think that would then motivate, investment. Like I said, certainty is the mother of investment. Fear of stranded assets kills investment.
Okay.
I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, the next one is David Pollock again. David?
Yeah. First, just a quick comment, Jean, in relation to your question. I was on the board of Sustainable Development Technology Foundation that gave quite a lot of money to the Plasco group doing this pilot project in Ottawa. Ultimately, we felt that this story was ahead of itself. We were getting a better presentation than the results were demonstrating, along with the milestones that we had. And other investors, we came to a final moment asking for another significant second tranche of funding, and the board turned that down. And when they turned that down, other investors failed to step up to the plate, and the project kind of collapsed at that stage as it had been developed. But I was going to ask Jeff, I think part of the thing has been answered, but I'm just wondering if you were having a conversation with the Minister of Finance, is it really asking that the ask that you think would be most useful would be for some additional tax credits for various kinds of investments in the bioeconomy? I'm just wondering if CACOR, you know, as we develop our pathways, it's going to be developing a set of recommendations and things based on our work. But is that the doorway, sort of a simple concept of a set of tax credits that would have to be much more detailed? Is that the ask that you'd make to the Minister of Finance?
I think so, yes. But I'd be careful to make sure, this is based on my experience in working in Washington, D.C., that we ask for what we actually need. And what do I mean by that? Well, in Washington, a whole lot of, first of all, many of these startup companies are, their CEOs are engineers or chemists or scientists, and so they don't necessarily understand how the market works. And as a result, well, and parenthetically, by the way, that's why sometimes when a strategic investor comes in, they replace the CEO who was great at getting the project from somebody's garage to a pilot plant. But then when it comes time to go commercial, you know, the big strategics often think they need to have somebody who understands market economics better. But so in the US, for example, some of the scientist engineer driven second generation biofuels companies went to Washington and told them that all we need is a production tax credit and the money is just going to swamp us. We'll be swamped with investors. Well, that despite my and a couple of other people trying to explain to them that a production tax credit isn't going to do you any good because you're not producing anything yet. You know, and so what you probably need is an investment tax credit, you know, and not only that, you might also need, in the case of ethanol, volumetric mandates, or if not volumetric mandates, then GHG emission reduction, like the California one, the carbon intensity mandates, which reward fuels on the basis of how much carbon they reduce, as opposed to just, you know, that they have to be renewable. So I think, yes, David, I'd be more than happy to put more thought into this with you for the purposes of CACOR's ask of government, once we've solved the problems that John raised. But we need to we need to make sure that what we ask for is actually going to lead then to steel in the ground, because that's ultimately, if we're not getting plants built, then we're not really accomplishing anything.
For sure. Yeah.
And sometimes it's a combination of things. It's a combination of you know, a investment tax credit followed by a production tax credit, complemented by a renewable fuel in the case of a renewable fuel standard. So just before you go to the next question, Art, I just want to say your comment about SDTC was very helpful, John. Thank you for that and reminding me of that, because
David.
Sorry, David, your comment about SDTC, because many companies do that. They oversell, and I think you're far better off as a small business to undersell and you know, under promise and over deliver. And I think in the case of Plasco, they did the opposite because they were desperate to try to raise capital.
Yeah.
But you know, you can only overpromise so long. You actually have to deliver something, and so that's another piece of advice to companies that I often give clients: is that, you know, don't go in there and overpromise. Do the opposite.
For sure.
Okay, we have Peter Menke. I don't know if you just had a comment or you wanted to say something, but you haven't responded to. Oh, there we are.
Yeah. Hi. Well, actually, just a couple of things. Years and years ago, way back in the 80s, actually, PEI put in a waste burning effort that produced electricity for it, and that's done very well with minimal pollution, etc. So it does have some successes. But the other point I was trying to make really had, now I've forgotten it. At any rate, I just wanted to mention that one about PEI. Thanks.
Well, and also, Peter, the University of Prince Edward Island put in a solar system for its residential, for the residences, hot water for the showers.
Well, yes, that was years ago when I was president down there. And that actually, I think, has gone by the boards. But the island is doing an awful lot of good things trying to help out with this. Thanks.
Okay, our next question, and this will be the last of the recorded session, is John Meyer.
Okay, I just wanted to say that EROI is such a critical question. You had, when you said 9% of coverage, the world's forest coverage was Canada. I mean, in Canada, I think our average is about 1.7 cubic meters per hectare production of biomass. In the US for forests. In the US, it's triple that. And some species, I think red oak, this is going back 30 years, in the Amazon get up to produce up to 50 cubic meters per hectare annually. And so I've looked at biomass grown for energy, not waste, but grown for energy as non-viable to produce ethanol or any kind of energy aside from heating, wood heating in this country. And the reason ethanol survives is the subsidies, which is why I think we have to really make our subsidies, our money flows, incentives, energy rational. What have you, I mean, when you look at the hard energy in, energy out, how do these things stack up to you, Jeff?
Well, I think, again, you raised some interesting points, especially with respect to the growing season in Canada, and we're a northern country where trees grow more slowly than they do in equatorial countries or even in the US. But I'm even thinking about existing forestry companies and existing pulp and paper mills where pulp can be used to make biodegradable plastic bottles. I mean, this technology exists, and we need to foster that here in Canada because otherwise, yeah, these mills are going out of business. Sadly, maybe one of the outcomes of climate change will be that trees will grow more quickly in Canada. I don't know as the climate warms, but
they've been burning down more regularly as well.
Sorry?
They've been burning down and getting eaten by beetles more regularly as well. So we'll see how that comes out.
But I think that's a very a good point, with which I would prefer to have this gentleman that I mentioned before, Don O'Connor, might have better answers for, because he's studied a lot of this stuff. But for sure, trees definitely grow faster in southern climates than they grow here in Canada. But even at that, with 9% of the world's forests, we're talking 348 million hectares. All of Europe is about 450 million hectares. So the whole of Europe is only 100 million hectares more than Canada's forest cover. If you properly manage forests, like one of the reasons that they burn down is because they're not properly managed, and there's just so much trash left in the forest, or from fallen trees and so on, that forest fires thrive. So we really need to do a better job of managing our forests. Same is true in California, frankly. What do we do with that wood when we harvest it? We don't necessarily just have to burn it. As I said before, that might not be the most efficient, but I don't know if you've noticed, but tall wood buildings now, John, University of British Columbia, the building code is holding us back. It used to be that you could only do, and I don't know what the Ontario building code is, 6 or 8 stories with wood. Now it's the UBC has an 18-story building. You know, so it's, if we can build tall wood buildings and store all that carbon there, that would be another wonderful use of Canada's forests.
Yeah.
Rather than just, you know, making 2x4s, we need to add more value.
Absolutely.
All right,
I'd
with
like to make
that, we're,
See Edward
just
waving his hand.
make a comment that my daughter Marianne is leading the initiative to rewrite the building code from our NRC. And she made a presentation to the same group a short while ago. If you really want to influence the building codes for the future, it's her job. And you could contact her at NRC because she's holding meetings the same way we're holding them, but largely via Skype with all of the provincial building code authorities, in the hope that there'll be a brand new one that will reflect these kinds of initiatives, including 10-story high wooden buildings and so forth.
Can you provide a contact?
Yes, I can.
okay. What I'd like to do is to stop the formal recording now, and we'll continue with the informal discussion.